the Grey Hat Beard podcast. Hello and welcome to show 12 of the Grey Hat Beard podcast. Now this is actually a pre-intro because as I was editing it, I realised that we didn't actually make the most of the news. And the biggest news we had this week is that Alan Erdley, the hat of Grey Hat Beard, is now an MVP, a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional. And I don't think we made enough of it. So Al won't have heard this, but I just want to say how absolutely stoked we are for him, how much he's worked for this and how much he's truly earned it. Many of you probably thought he was an MVP already, but no, this is actually his first time. So big congratulations to Al. Also, a very smaller note, it looks like my microphone cut in and out a little bit during this, so apologies, and I hope it hasn't affected the show too much. Okay, back to the show now. Hello and welcome to show 12 of Grey Hat Beards, the modern workplace podcast where we talk about all things Microsoft in the modern workplace space. I'm Grey, my name's Kevin McDonnell, I'm a solutions architect at CPS.
I'm Al, I'm a solutions architect at CPS and newly minted MVP in Office and App Services.
Hey. And I'm Beard, so Gary Trinder, Solutions Architect at CPS, Microsoft MVP for Office Development, and also a member of the PMP team. And we have a guest today who's come to join us. For those in the video may have seen there's another shiny head like mine who's joined us. We have Iain Smith. If you want to introduce yourself.
Good morning. Yeah, so I'm bald. Yes, Iain Smith. I'm the Professional Services Director at CPS.
So Ian's joined us for our topic today, where we're going to be talking about collaboration versus unified comms, best of friends or mortal enemies. And we'll cover that in the second half to have a bit of battle. It is slightly outnumbered, you may think, but I've heard Ian when he gets going, so I think he can more than hold himself there. But first, we're going to start off with some news and what we've been up to. So Gary, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, so I guess what we've been up to, busy, as usual. So not much chance for kind of looking around, but there was a couple of bits of news that I'd seen. So we've been able to do this for a while, for embedding SharePoint pages into Microsoft Teams personal apps. Microsoft have now released some guidance around that. So technically it's in preview. So before it wasn't really a thing. People were using it, but now there's some actual guidance in there of how you can use it, how you can get set up as well. So interesting to see that the documentation is now coming, catching up with people who are finding innovative ways of displaying content within Teams.
So it's not with this, it's just that they're giving guidance on how to do it. Is that the bigger bit?
Yeah, there are some, I think there's some limitations into kind of what you can do and what you can't do with certain pages. I know that if like classic pages, for example, don't work as well.
Who's using classic pages?
Exactly.
Classic pages, come on.
Yeah. So, it's just to kind of make it a little bit more official of, yes, you can use it, but be aware that it's preview. And if it's in preview, things can change. So,
And I think that's
putting it into production then.
That's quite an interesting one, isn't it? Because if you are embedding your intranet page, for example, into Teams, it means that you don't have to put it into a tab within a channel within a team. You're actually just putting it on the left-hand rail, aren't you? So it's just making it easier for people to access SharePoint content directly from the Teams interface.
Yeah, get SharePoint from Teams where people are going now, isn't it?
And that's a lot of clients have been asking for that as well, to be able to just use Teams in that way.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's bring your content to the people rather than the other way around. Whereas before it'd be here's your corporate intranet, go to the intranet to consume it. Now it's here's the intranet, but you can consume it from different ways and integrate that with notifications and things as well. Maybe SharePoint news showing in Teams. So yeah. Nice.
The other one there, the intranet, absolutely, but it also talks about putting the learning pathway solution in there. So getting the help in front of there, easy to use, and getting all those videos and that great rich content embedded. I think that's a nice little change.
And learning pathways, as we all know, with adoption at the moment, there's lots of companies who are scratching around trying to find resources to help the kind of employees get up to speed with using Teams because they've just had to react to the recent, the current circumstances. That's really going to help as well. So yeah, a few links to learning pathways, and definitely check that out as well because it's very, very useful. Another bit of news, so Office 365 CLI, we released our monthly, we did our monthly release, so we're up to 2.10, lots of new features in there for upgrading SharePoint frameworks. There's a cool little feature that we've added called Code Tour. I'm really excited about this. So if you're upgrading your SharePoint framework projects, what we'd have done previously is we'd have given you a report, and you would have gone through the report and gone, I need to go to this file, I need to make these changes. What we've done is use this Code Tour extension in Visual Studio Code where you can load in the report and it will go through, and you can go step by step through all of the changes that you need to make within your code. So you don't have this disconnect, and it's really good to just understand what changes you need to make as well, where you're making them and why. So that was kind of built out in the open. It was a couple of ideas that we had. Hugo Bernier picked it up and went, yeah, I really like this, and basically got it released really quickly. So if you are doing SharePoint framework project upgrades, we'd love you to use this. We've seen Mark Anderson pick this up, who is self-confessed non-dev, and he's been raving about it, that it's just made the process so much easier. But it's enabled him to learn as well as he's gone through it, because we are kind of showing the areas in the code where you need to make the changes. So yeah, really excited about it.
This is a great example. I think the Code Tool has been a lovely feature that was released with VS Code. And what I love about the CLI is it's not just about getting the latest and greatest code in there. It's about helping people to use the code effectively. So I think for all those, as you say, like Mark, who aren't necessarily devs out there, great example of the kind of things you can build into and get involved in open source projects that's not necessarily the deepest code elements to it. So really good.
Yeah,
really good
and the one thing is, it was highlighting now because SharePoint framework is not this new thing anymore. There's lots of versions that we've kind of gone through. Mark was having to upgrade a solution that was targeted at on-premises SharePoint, so that was 1.4.1, and he had to go all the way up to the latest version. So he had a lot of changes to make, and that just made it a little less painful and a bit easier for him. So that was.
And let's face it, we always want upgrades to be less painful.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think he put a blog about the process, didn't he?
Which was very nice.
To get out and share the notes.
Yeah, there's a post out of how to use that. Yeah, we're just after feedback at the moment. We'll get the docs out there and help you. But yeah, Mark's post will be really helpful. I guess the only other thing that's happened since last time was I actually passed an exam. So there we go. I'm
well done.
Well done, Gary.
Contributing to the value of LinkedIn.
Exactly. Yes, I'm just yet another your acclaim badge that you've skipped past.
Yeah.
Congratulations. So we're going to go to our guest now, and having done the dev news, Iain, have you got some news you wanted to share?
Yep, four bits actually. So I don't know if you all know, but it was announced a couple of weeks ago, the uptake of Microsoft Teams. So before COVID, I think it was the day before COVID and the lockdown, the Teams active users was 13 million at that point in time. And now, as of a few weeks ago, we're hitting, I think it's around about 77 million as of today. So the uptake of Teams is it's crazy at this very moment. And I think we certainly in CPS are seeing that as well. And also what we're seeing is like a kind of a second wave of Teams where people, as Gary alluded to a little bit in his update, companies have thrown Teams out and people are using it. But now we're seeing people now embracing kind of, right, what else can it do? What else can we allow it to do? Users are now using it, they understand it, and now let's build on that platform and make it feature rich. So, and
how do we make sure it doesn't collapse because there's too many different teams? How do we govern it effectively to make sure it's used well as also?
Yeah.
getting it quickly before it's kind of 6 to 9 months down the line, and you have 5 different teams doing the same thing.
Before it turns into the Wild West. That's
Exactly.
always been the risk, hasn't it? 100 teams, none of them being used, just one team being used.
It is that, yeah. Also, as well, interestingly, I saw from Microsoft on I think it was an insider acknowledgement. I think they've added another 6,000 servers into the architecture of Teams just to deal with the demand and the scale of what it's going to. It's crazy.
That's interesting, isn't it? When you start to see those numbers of just adding 6,000 servers, it kind of really points to why hyperscale cloud is the way forward, because they can do that.
Isn't that just running a for loop on a script?
Well, no, I think they've actually had to do quite a lot of hardware provisioning for this. It's been a lot of scaling up their data centers and getting more kit into there. And I think their ability, to me, it's their ability to be able to scale those data centers as well as the actual underlying cloud, the combination of both. And I've certainly seen the performance, when we first went through the crisis, at the start of the crisis, I think we saw quite a few issues and things scaling back a bit.
And slowing down, wasn't it? Logging onto Teams, joining meetings just seemed to be a little bit slower than you'd expect.
It's interesting because I know working with our internal security team, they've picked up some anomalous activities, and it's funny little things that they go, oh well, that's taking place in Singapore, and it's like, well, you're adding somebody to a membership in Teams, and they're obviously distributing it worldwide to try and level out, where the peak demand is. So it is an interesting one, isn't it? If you think about how many services you can scale and grow by over 50% in 3 months, or over 100% in 3 months.
Yeah. And I guess, sorry, Gary, go on.
I was just going to say the numbers are kind of, that spike that's just happened is incredible. And I always look at the numbers and think, now Microsoft have kind of got those numbers. Where do they go next? Because I'm pretty sure they were looking at, okay, we'll try and scale this over the next few years, and in literally a month, it's gone straight up. It's like, okay, we've got people in Teams now. How do we measure success?
Yeah, exactly.
From their point of view.
Yeah, it's
down as schools go back. I know my son's been using Google Meet, and some of them been using Teams occasionally. So I can't see that number as schools go back and some other things. That number will drop off. So I think you're right, Gary. How do they measure success? Knowing, because they're quoting those numbers a lot more than they did. They used to be very cagey, and you'd only get every 6 months or so at most the number of active users. They're quoting that a lot more. So be interesting to see where it goes next.
Yeah, and that goes with and I saw another stat as well a couple of weeks ago where it talks around Microsoft's dark fiber connection around the world. So they've got 1.4 million miles of dark fiber connecting all their Azure database environments and locations all together. And you just think 1.4 million is a lot of cable,
That's a big role, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, and that's just to make it as optimal as what they can possibly make Teams. So it's interesting. Second point I've got in no particular order is Teams Skype Consumer got announced a couple of weeks ago. So now you can send messages to your friends and family from the Teams client straight to the Skype Consumer client. It's still rolling out. I don't think it's in every tenant yet, but it is on its way. I'm seeing more and more people saying, "Oh yeah, that's working for me now." So there's a couple of little stipulations around versioning, but it works pretty well.
Do you think that's been
very clear
by the adoption of personal and the current situation of I've got Teams.
Before you go into that, Al, just for anyone listening, we're not talking about Skype for Business. This is the Skype that you use to chat to your granny and things like that. Yeah. This is the classic Skype one that's been rolled up there.
Exactly. Yeah, the consumer version as opposed to business conversion. Yeah, I think you're right, Al. Just to answer your question, I think a lot of things have been fast tracked through, and not only in Microsoft, but we see it in clients as well. Like I said, they've just thrown it out, and where that would have been a 3 or 4 month project to plan and stuff, it's just been pushed. So there's a couple of things we're seeing in Microsoft where they are increasing the capability of the application.
I think the other I was talking with a client, and two reasons they used it. One was for interviews with people, because they know it gives people the option if they've got Skype, which a lot more consumers have. The other big one interesting was interviews with journalists and BBC and people like that. Still quite use Skype quite a bit, so it was a interesting case there. Again, I've always thought of it as something for the family, but there are commercial-ish reasons as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that you talk about journalists and stuff, that lends itself as well, that then now you can do Zoom meetings into Teams as well. You can bridge the Zoom area into Teams. So you don't have to be a full Zoom house or a full Microsoft Teams house. You can talk with somebody who's got Zoom through your Teams client. So that is an interoperability you can do.
Yeah, and it's those sorts of things that the current climate is that. You would never have seen that as a high priority 3 months ago, would you?
Yeah. No, but also, Ali, I don't think you would have ever seen it as Zoom in their walled garden saying, right, I'm going to open up some kind of dev APIs or whatever it is to say, I'm going to talk with Teams. It's almost like it's a two-horse race, but they've collaborated and so
I think it's interesting because you could argue a bit with Slack as well. There's some Slack integrations that are coming, and you could say, well, Slack is a competitor to Teams, but effectively, it's if you take that stance, then one of you is going to get trampled and not be around. Yet if you kind of go, well, yeah, you can use Slack, but you can also use Teams. You've got the best of both worlds. It's a better experience. You don't then have people having to choose. And I think that's, and we've talked about this in the past about generally things in the cloud. It allows you to bring what you're using and connect things together to create your own little environment, really built off different systems, rather than having to do we have to move off this system and move on to the other one, which we'd have done in the past. And then you've got a whole project you need to deal with. Whereas now it's not necessarily that common.
No, I think you're right, and I'm sure Zoom, Teams, Microsoft, and Slack are all seeing it, as opposed to if you're a Zoom house and you want to go to Teams, that's a 12-month project to move. Whereas now, if they open up that API, you can have both, and they're both getting licensing costs and all this stuff goes with it.
People are a lot less likely to move if there's interoperability, so it benefits everybody, really, doesn't it?
Yeah. Exactly.
I think also there was an interesting interview with Jeff Teeper, and I'm trying to remember where it goes out. I'll dig it out and put it in the show notes, but it's mentioned on the Microsoft Cloud Show. And I think the key is they see Teams as the hub. It's that central place. I think we see this with Microsoft. It's not we have to have the very best video call capabilities. Let's make Teams the central hub that people go to, and hopefully you'll use the call capabilities, but let's get people using this as the one place. And he was talking about Teams being bigger than Windows, as being more of a central place than Windows is now. And I think that kind of attitude, that one place that people want to go, this is bringing everyone to it, is really making it bigger and bigger. So I'll share a link. It's a long article, but a really good one, really good interview to get that insight of where Jeff Teeper is trying to take Teams.
There is, with all these different services as well, there is a bit of kind of like worthy rival kind of approach. So like Microsoft, they see Slack and see Zoom as now like the worthy rivals, of which they not necessarily competing directly against to get rid of them. They're competing to keep ahead, to challenge the other ways of doing things. And then we've seen this happen. We've seen teams react to Zoom with the different number of video that you can have on at one time. That wouldn't have happened if Zoom hadn't come along, and you can treat it as, well, we get rid of the competition, or we work with the competition to better ourselves, and I think that's a big part of it.
It is healthy competition.
It is.
Exactly, yeah.
It is, absolutely, yeah. The next thing I was going to just mention, I've got two left, is something called local media optimization. So this is a brand new kid on the block to the world of unified communication. So it's probably worth me explaining what local media optimization is first.
Non-UC people have gone, whoa, I'm not sure what this is all about.
It's almost,
I like it.
It's almost the same when Gary started talking about Office 365 lies, and my eyes glazed over. I thought, it's good to know what my team do. I've got no idea what this means, So local media optimization. So if I step back slightly, there was something, and it's been around for a number of years in the the link Skype for Business world before it came to Teams, something called media bypass. So imagine this, where in Teams that you do a call, a conference, whatever it is, and because Microsoft Teams and their infrastructure's up in the cloud somewhere, wherever your tenant's located, before media bypass, what used to happen is it's classed in UC terms as tromboning, bad name in my opinion, but we'll go with it, where you did a call, and because the stuff was in Azure as such, everything had to pass through that architecture to make that call, which is not optimized in some ways, because you've got to go out and then come all the way back in. Them two people might be sat on the same floor as each other, or group of people, so it's not efficient. So they brought out something called media bypass, which was a technology where you went onto a call, it realized you're all on the same LAN, and said, right, okay, I don't need to trombone off the server. I can just go locally with media to bypass that. I'll send a signal up to make sure everybody's on the connection, but then I'm going to go almost peer-to-peer. So that's been great. That's been around for a number of years now, and that's been in Teams for a fair bit of time. A couple of weeks ago, probably mid-April, we started seeing this thing being certified called local media optimization, very similar to media bypass, but subtly different. So this is very much around PSTN, telephone calls, instead of internal calls. So again, with a user sat on Teams, they make a call out via the PSTN connection, whatever that is, SIP, trunking, or via ISDN or PRI, or whatever copper cable you've got sat for your connection, or PBX. Again, exactly the same scenario. That call used to go out. The user might be sat in Wakefield, where I am. Our tenant is sat in Ireland. It had to go out through Ireland, and that was the hairpin back out through to your PSTN, which could be on premises, or it could be in a SIP trunk somewhere else. Again, not optimized, not efficient routing. So what Microsoft's done with media gateway suppliers, like the likes of Ribbon, Audio Codes, and AnyNode, and Cisco as well, actually, is provide this thing called local media optimization, which recognizes that a call is going to be a PSTN connection, and instead of tromboning out or hairpinning out over the Azure network, these appliances can actually deal with the transcoding within themselves. So these appliances can be physical, virtual, and they can do the transcoding. So it, again, really efficient way of making a telephone call externally.
So this is something that where you want to connect to someone else externally. If you're seeing some inefficiencies and it's not being as I'm trying to say it's any better than good as you want, then you can configure it to be more effective. And it's just enabling more within that that you can configure effectively.
Oh, it's a good try, that, Kevin, but almost there. So imagine it as in our office in Marlow. So we're sat in the office, we're making a telephone call out to McDonald's down the road. In the old world, without local media,
desk again.
Yeah. Without the local media optimization, we'd make that call. That'd go out from Marlow, from where we are. That'd go to Azure with our tenant, which is, I don't know where our tenant is, Ireland or wherever. Let's say it's Ireland for the time being. And then that would then come back to a localized telephone circuit to make the call out to McDonald's.
And the impact of that would be slightly slower.
Yeah, latency, packet loss, all the stuff that goes with it.
And quality. So what this is doing is trying to improve your quality, and you by reducing the amount of network traffic that's going through. But it's something you actively configure.
Yes, it is absolutely. So it's almost cutting that leg off to go out to Ireland and making that happen.
I guess it may be also interesting where you want to make sure that your content's not going out to Ireland. And I know it wouldn't necessarily store your content, but it's keeping your traffic within geographical boundaries should you want to as well. And would come into things. So interesting.
So that came out a few weeks ago. So the reason why I've put it as a talking point today is it's works well with something called SIP trunking, but there is challenges what are known in the industry with copper cable, ISDN. So I guess if anybody's listened to this and listening to me waffling on about UC, then I'd probably just stay clear slightly of local media optimization at this very moment in time, because there is bugs what are being seen. So anyway, yeah, well, we will leave it there, I guess. And then the final point for my update is we're now starting to see Gen 2 hardware coming out for UC as well, which is really interesting. So again, in terms of form factors, not massively changed from Gen 1, but again, to cater for this like media bypass, local media optimization, there is new circuitry within these form factors, and also there is some new stuff. So again, Gen 2 is just launching, so the likes you've gone the carousel spinning round. There's some new stuff now which have only just come out, and some good kit. And I don't think there's now any.
The Gen 2. So the Gen 2, is that's specific to the local media? That's to get the benefits you need the Gen 2, or?
Yeah, so some of it's based on the hardware and the grunt of the actual innards of the form factor, what can do this media processing locally instead of getting Azure to do it for you. So it is the grunt work. But again, I think a lot of the vendors have seen Gen 2 as right. Well, let's refresh our set of devices as well. So
So I think something we'll maybe hit in the second part is looking at why these devices and these sort of team certified devices mean such a difference. I know it's a conversation Al and I have kind of joined in talking about Converse recently, but I think let's hit that in the second part of the show.
Brilliant.
Interesting. And a different side to usual for us. So thank you for those.
No problem.
So for me, I've been following the show last week with Stefan Bisser. I've been looking a bit more into the bot framework Composer, which has been great. The latest GA'd version, I had some issues with the ones before and just bits and pieces not working that well, but the latest one really has sort of taken on that and worked nicely. And I also used that opportunity to have a look at the adaptive card template service. This is a service where if you're using adaptive cards and you've got your data, rather than building into your code and keeping all those bits of JSON in your code, you can send it off to a third-party service, and there's a hosted version, so there's a lot of the standard templates that you can use, and therefore you don't need to manage those and keep them up to date. They will always get the latest one there, or you can host it yourself, at least in theory. Having a little bit of fun and games with that at the moment. Gary's been kindly trying to help me out, but neither of us have got very far so far. So I'm hoping to use this good opportunity to contribute back once I've got it working, add a bit more to the documentation, and fix a couple of things which seem to be a little bit hard coded. But I won't grumble too much. It is a dev branch. It's very preview stuff, but I'm hoping I'll share a bit on that soon. Other things, there was a very nice post from Joel Olsen. We mentioned the virtual marathon last time that I spoke on, also our colleague Sam Graber. And Joel Olsen's done a very nice post about behind the scenes of running that and how they kind of got out, and actually a secret admitted in there, every single speaker that applied that joined the pre-show technical test, they actually got to speak. So a huge number of speakers. You can see, for those looking out there, they're different languages, and I thought that was one thing that really stood out, that they had tracks in different languages. The Japanese one was particularly popular, Spanish, French, really impressive.
They had nothing in English.
I was about to say that as well. Yeah, you said it.
So just American, according to this, in a good spot. We won't talk too many rows with our American listeners, but yeah, apparently there was only American spoken. I've put up the wrong accent today. Lots of MVPs. A really interesting one. Obviously, talking a lot about Teams this week. Very good discussion around Teams live events and their use of that, and how they managed to get Microsoft to help, and how they've scaled up, and the issues they help with there. So a long read, but well worth having a look through. It was a fantastic event, and it's interesting seeing that behind the scenes. I used to work backstage in theatre at school and university, and I always love hearing how things actually work. You see all the pretty stuff up front, and you see the bits that go wrong, but you don't always see the amount of effort that goes into these things. And it was really, really good of Joel to share that. Other news, our friend of the show, which is a slightly annoying phrase, I shouldn't use that, but Maureen Summers has done a post on how you can prepare for Project Cortex. So lots of interest when Cortex was announced, and still a lot of interest, people really seeing the reality starting to come through as we see the term store updates. But Maureen's really got 10 great posts on how you can start to prepare for things now, thinking about that business case, getting your content. It's put in there, interesting one. Make sure your content is in Microsoft 365. I'd say after builds, they announced the connectors. It doesn't necessarily need to be in Microsoft 365, but getting everything together, starting to familiarize yourself with things going to work, creating your knowledge and starting to structure it in a way. And definitely something I think we at CPS can start having a think about and start planning for there.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's been the mantra for the last 15 years, isn't it? Get everything into SharePoint and tag it and get it all organized and sorted out.
Absolutely. And I think when you're organizing it, it's think about how you're going to use the knowledge, who's going to own that, who's going to be the, from what we've seen from Cortex, it's going to be those knowledge experts that everyone can contribute knowledge, but maybe have certain areas where it's curated. Think about the different elements with that. And it's a really good post to get you thinking about things. Nice little article there. And the final one that I wanted to share that I think fits again with our teams related stuff today is about the location of data at rest and how it's stored. And the great thing about Teams and being in the cloud is you don't often have to think about these things. But things like messages, at the moment, they're held in Azure table storage, and that's moving to Cosmos. That's incredible. I mean, the volume of messages that come through those chats that are going to be in there is being indexed in table storage is, really shows the scale you can get to. And that's moving to Cosmos. I think be interesting to see what happens with table storage, whether with the free tiers that starts to disappear, but a lot going on there. Sorry, Gary.
It's interesting. We've literally this week have been doing some kind of like Cosmos DB work, and at one point it was, we've got some configuration data. Let's just store it in the table storage because we've got a storage account with an Azure function, easier rather than cluttering it up in the Cosmos DB. Absolute pain because at some point table storage just stopped getting updated in the SDKs. So if you use the latest like .NET SDK, you can't use table storage with it. You've got to go back to version 11 and then you get into Cosmos DB. And I really think that the table storage is just going to disappear and that's going to go into the free tier of Cosmos because there's no reason for it to be in table storage. You get so many benefits of scale getting it into that free tier in Cosmos. And then if you do need to scale out and go to different regions, you can easily do that. So,
but it is that free tier that makes all the difference and enables the use of Cosmos DB.
Massively. Yeah. There was such a big gap. It was either you got table storage and there's not much happening, or you're going full Cosmos DB and global distribution and all that. Whereas now it's much more of a compelling service to use. It's there and available.
And what I loved about this is you look down there, these are all services that we can use. Microsoft Data Warehouse for the telemetry. That is a service in Azure, so you could do the same thing. It's using Cosmos DB, it's using blob storage, it's using SharePoint. This isn't that they've built teams on bespoke technology underneath. They are using what we can all use as well. And I think that's a really good indicator for teams. It is something new, but really it's built on all those pillars that we know and love/hate already.
I think this is great seeing this because it's I have lots of conversations with customers using Teams, and they look at the Teams interface and you then talk about SharePoint and they see it as a separate thing, whereas actually everything's just so connected now. To see that actually there's other elements there that in the background, like the voicemail in Exchange. I don't know why. I wouldn't think it would go there, but now I've seen it. It's like, actually, that does make sense.
It's been there as a capability for years. I think the other thing about that, though, is that clearly shows where content is then being ingested for things like compliance, which adds to the story. Because when you say actually chat, I've had conversations with clients around the compliance and should they turn off chat messages? Should they turn it off and archive it after 30 days? Well, if you can do e-discovery over the top of it and you've got DLP policies in place, you don't really need to. And I think that's adds to the value of that story of we've got the technical storage, but then actually we've got how it's being ingested into other things to enable other capabilities.
And I think it's also a great message here that you don't need to understand all these different underlying things. You can just go, I just want to use Teams. But to most people, that conversation, well, I didn't realize that was in SharePoint. Don't have to. It's just there. You can use it. You don't need to worry about the underlying bit. As you get more into it, you may need to know more of those things. But there's a kind of nice story and a journey back and forth. And I think that's important with Teams as well.
That's the art of the adoption part. Don't mention SharePoint. Just use Teams, and then just keep it as Teams is the single pane of glass that you need to actually see all of that content. If you don't have to worry about where it's being stored, then users shouldn't have to.
Teams just fronts everything, doesn't it? Not that I'm going to challenge Martina because I do know her, but it's actually Exchange in Azure, not Exchange on premises for voicemail. Don't know if she put.
She said in the Exchange, didn't say online or on premise. So absolutely.
It's only online. Yeah, it's not on premises anymore.
And she did say later in this tweet, I'll share the link to tweet, that this was from a Microsoft Docs page. So it's not Martina getting it wrong. It would be Microsoft if it was there.
there's been a few articles about where that content is actually set. It's interesting. That leads on to one of my pieces of news, which was Giphy being taken over by Facebook, and ideally Facebook are saying they're going to bring it into the Instagram team. I wonder whether that will change some of the perceptions of the security around Teams if some of those external services are, more in quotes social media rather than enterprise. So there's some interesting implications considering how widely Giphy is used just as a service for other products like Twitter, Teams. So the security implications could be interesting for that.
I think it's good because at the moment that GIF conversation is an organisation stuck in the past and doesn't want fun stuff versus let's be fun and cool because we're allowing GIFs. This actually opens a third one into there about actually considering how that data is being used. So
absolutely, what kind of input there is in terms of ingress of information. But interesting one to see how that will play out.
Absolutely.
So all my other pieces of news are kind of security related and gearing up for doing some security and compliance pieces next week. So Patrick Gimene shared a great article published by Microsoft around Microsoft threat protection. And it's always been one of those areas that you try and get into it and understand how it all works. And it's quite difficult. There's lots of moving parts. It's a long read, but it really describes really well how Microsoft threat protection, from everything from the WMI telemetry on machines through to Azure, is being used to track incidents and identify incidents and then mitigate the risk to them. And it's very technical, goes into a lot of detail around specific incidents that they're using as examples, but it is a really useful read. And certainly if you're thinking about how security works, that complete end-to-end, it's not Azure threat protection, it's Microsoft threat protection they're talking about here. It is every element of Microsoft's technology that's being brought to bear here. And it's a really, really interesting article. I did have to read it 3 times to really get to grips with all of the terminology that's in there. But it's a really interesting piece.
And interesting that they're talking about that threat protection without putting one of those pictures around the globe with all the different lines flying. That seems to be an essential part of any of those usually. So it's nice to see that not there for a change.
It's very much brought down to an actual attack and how they're matching, the movements of that attack within a network, within the devices, and how that's being used. So yeah, and I think it would be, clients would be able to understand it. If they've got security teams, they would be able to understand it and go, I recognise that. I've had to deal with some of that, the investigation around it.
What one thing I would say is the picture of the attacker. I mean, a guy in a red hat with sunglasses. That's going to make it very easy to identify. And I think Linux may have something to say about that, using that picture as well.
You see him walking down the street, you're going to go, yeah, you're an attacker, aren't you?
Yeah.
So yeah. And then the other piece, following on from our conversations a couple of weeks ago about GitHub Satellite Conference, is they've just released integration with Azure Sentinel for GitHub. So you can protect your repositories in GitHub using Azure Sentinel. And
for those that don't know, what's Azure Sentinel?
So Azure Sentinel is essentially like Splunk. It's a SIEM. It's pulling all of the activity together across your environment. So whether it's log spaces for Office 365, or whether it's your firewall logs, your network logging, pulls it all together, analyzes it all together, identifies threats, and then you've got playbooks that you can do to execute against particular threats that are identified. The threat protection, the way it maps out those, you had your picture of your attacker and then different machines. Sentinel will actually produce those maps for you and identify the activity that's taking place. So it will look at all the data, it will parse it to try and find information. It will then run playbooks to actually do things like, prevent access, block access, shut down machines. You can do pretty much anything in it. But it's got a lot of analytics in there, and then a lot of actions in there as well.
And so on the GitHub side, is this looking for packages that may have compromised content in? And
so the thing that struck me about this article is that it's not just like the other one, it's describing what you can do. This has every single line of code you need to set this up and to actually configure Sentinel to consume the logs from GitHub, and then the patterns that you need to be actually implementing to carry out searches over the content to match particular threats.
Yeah, so it's even audit log content. So it's people trying to get into GitHub as well. It's not just the contents in there.
And this article has it's got a section right at the top called spoiler, and you can't really do anything other than click on it and have a look. And what it actually shows is, so if you scroll up a little bit, you'll see it. But if you click on it, it shows all of the threats that it's actually talking about, and
the box, Kevin.
The box.
Oh, just
up above where it says.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Thank you.
So it shows you all of the scenarios. It's got meta techniques. So in terms of what a definition of what those actually are. It's got a phenomenal amount of information in there to describe.
You can't see it. There's things like sign-in bursts from multiple locations, inactive or new account usage, unusual number of repository clones, kind of things that will take place, as well as that security, vulnerability, and repos. That's included as well. That's a massive amount.
There's a massive amount
of GitHub.
Yeah. So I mean, it's like they've spoken to GitHub and gone, right, what are all the threats that you see coming in? And they've gone, well, these are all the things that we can see. Okay, we'll take all of those. We will give people the scripts to be able to check for those in Sentinel and actually then act on them.
Wow.
So it's a really comprehensive article.
This for me is like, before I didn't actually see this article. So now I've seen that now, if you mentioned it, Al, that to me is, GitHub as almost like, any dev around the world can just throw a repository up and use its source control. You've got that element. You've got the other element, which now you've got GitHub One, you've got Enterprise, you've got bring your own encryption, you've got then this level of auditing around, what's happening around your repositories. How do you track who's giving access potentially, who's deleting stuff they shouldn't? So almost from like an enterprise level tracking inside the organization.
And we talked about whether, GitHub versus DevOps. GitHub's outside of the perimeter, essentially, isn't it? But this it brings all of that telemetry into Azure Sentinel, which is within your organization. So it's essentially extending your security boundaries around your GitHub repositories, which I think it fills a gap that we were discussing a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I think we talked about this before. It's really exciting to see where, now Microsoft have got GitHub is where they're taking it, and there's so much activity, and not just from the really cool stuff that we've talked about before, but from the the security side that needs to be there for enterprises to start using it, potentially in favor of using Azure DevOps. It's interesting, Kev, you mentioned about scanning the code. So the actual code scanning that was mentioned at GitHub Satellite, we've had that turned on the PnP organization. So we've now got that code scanning going across all of our repositories. We actually turned it on the CLI the other day just to test it out. And it was really good to see the level of detail that it goes to. If it picks out a vulnerability, it will tell you, it explains it all, but it also explains then the code. So you can go step by step. You can decide, how you can change your code to be more secure. We ran it, and the only issues that we found were in our unit tests, not the actual executing code, which was great. So as a first pass, that was pretty good. But we're hoping we can just keep that going, and then it will be another badge on the repository to say, the code is scanned on a regular basis, it's secure, and give more confidence to people using open source who might not be too keen on it and think that it's it's code out in the open and therefore it's less secure. Well, the reality is it's probably more secure than anything.
And there was another good tweet I'll mention in the show notes, because I can't find it. I think it was Iris Clarkson that asked about where is GitHub data located, and if you want it just to be located in Europe and UK, what are your options? I think it was John Papper or someone else who came back with some details on that. So I'll share that. One's very, very interesting. So if you do want to have your located data, there are some options in a GitHub friendly way as well as the Azure DevOps. So interesting to think about. But I think, as we noted before the show starts, we do always overrun, and we've been going on a little bit now, so it's time to wrap up on the news. So we'll call a halt to part 1 of the show, and we'll get on to part 2, where we talk about unified comms and collaboration. Thank you very much, and see you just after the break.